NAFI would like to thank ForeFlight, Sporties, and AOPA for sponsoring this episode of the More Right Rudder podcast. This episode is sponsored by ForeFlight. Designed by pilots for pilots, ForeFlight helps CFIs bridge the gap between the classroom and the cockpit. Bring weather briefings to life with real-time map overlays, use track logs and 3D review for more dynamic debriefing, and use ForeFlight's next-generation logbook to log and share flights, endorsements, and more. Visit foreflight.com to get started. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the More Right Rudder podcast from the National Association of Flight Instructors. My name is Sarah Staudt. I'm the Program Development Manager here at NAFI and the host for this podcast. Joining me today is Jeffrey Madison. Jeffrey is an airline pilot, flight instructor, and author of a book that utilizes NASA reports for learning lessons for flight instructors. Welcome, Jeffrey.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me on the podcast. This is going to be fun.
We're certainly happy you could be here today. To start off, could you tell us a little bit more about your background and a couple little hints about your book?
Sure. So I am currently an airline pilot, also a current flight instructor and an MEI and author, as you mentioned. For the 6 years, I wrote an aviation safety column called Human Factors for General Aviation News. In it, I analyzed NASA reports, and I always started with my own sort of snafu and then transitioned into a topic that was matched it in the NASA reports with 3 or 5 different NASA reports. And I did that simply for the purpose of getting general aviation pilots, flight instructors, and students used to looking at NASA reports and also using them, submitting them. In the airline world, we submit them all the time. If you think you did something wrong, you fill out a NASA. But in the GA world, it's not so common. So I then wrote a book in an effort to kind of give back. I had a lot of help along the way to become an airline pilot, including being mentored by 3 really old and really cool Tuskegee Airmen. And so the book is called YIKES, 100 Smart Pilots and the Dumb Things They Did, Yet Lived to Tell About Them. And the idea was all the proceeds from the sales of the book go to funding flight scholarships, flight simulators, aviation equipment, and or other scholarships to STEM groups, underserviced Civil Air Patrol squadrons, and also other flight schools that are under-resourced.
All right, cool. So that sounds like that all goes to a really good cause. And our main topic today is getting into the benefits of those NASA reports for flight instructors, not just filling them out themselves. We've got the advisory circular for that. Today, we're more talking about how to use and incorporate them in your teaching, and especially in decision making. So frequently, flight instructors and other educational content producers go to the NTSB database, which is, of course, a wealth of information in itself, but it's 2 years behind. And it only captures things that cross that threshold that require an NTSB investigation.
That's right.
And like you said, you fill these out when you even think you did something wrong. So there's a whole lot out there that pilots are doing or thinking they're doing, or situations they're reporting that are never going to make it into NTSB because they don't cross that threshold of requiring an investigation.
That's right. And for me, and I think other people have done this, if you've ever been to an airport and you've hung out on the FBO porch or in somebody's hangar and watched people land or take off and judge them, right? Or listen to
our imaginary number cards.
That's right. That's exactly right. And or listen to the older pilots or other pilots talk about, their near misses or whatever, those things that they learned about flying from that. That's hangar flying. And NASA reports are a form of virtual hangar flying in my mind. And because you get to hear from the pilot or the air traffic controller or the flight attendant or the maintenance person themselves about the incident in their own words. They didn't die, so you don't have to speculate what was going on. And they also submit a lesson learned. Sometimes the lesson learned isn't exactly what you thought they might think would be the lesson learned, and I've got a story about that. But there's always something, and so that's great because, again, it's another resource. The person survived the incident, so you can hear in their own words what was going on in their own head and then what they think they learned from it. That's really a valuable tool for flight instructors and students.
Yeah, that kind of first-person perspective is nice because, like you said, sometimes the lessons that they learn, there's some handful of doozies in there that are like, well, that's not the takeaway I hoped you would have had. But a lot of them are really valuable, and they come from the different experiences. So, this kind of goes back to that old adage of you're not going to live long enough to make all the mistakes yourself. So the NTSB is one portion of learning from other people's mistakes, but NASA is also a great one for kind of those maybe smaller type incidences, or even identifying trends at particular airports is a lot of what NASA reports get used for as well. So if you're going to an airport, you could always look for reports from that particular airport and see what's happened there recently, kind of get an idea if you're seeing any trends to look out for.
That's a great point, Sarah. Somebody recently mentioned that to me. It hadn't occurred to me, but in one of my columns, I actually talk about airports in that regard. So it's called local procedures. And the idea is that some airports have their own kind of local procedure that makes it easy for the people who are familiar with the area to get in and out. And there's one in Virginia that I talk about that is called something County Airport, but everybody else called it for instance, Birdseye. This is just an example. And so it's got a common traffic advisory frequency, and common traffic advisory frequencies are often the same within 10, 15, 20 nautical miles of many different airports, right? So when I flew into this airport, I was giving the AFD, I know that's an old phrase now.
I still have to cognitively remind myself it's the chart supplement now, and my brain, even though it's been digital for years, it's not the little green book anymore.
That's right. Thank you, Sarah. So based upon the chart supplement, I was using the call sign for that airport, something county traffic, but everybody else was going Birdseye. And because I was on CTAF 122.9, I just thought, okay, that's someplace else in the area. So just be aware of that. And as a result, I had a near miss. And the guy, when we parted ways, right? I dove right. He climbed left. He goes, "Who's the idiot in the pattern?" And I said, "Sorry, I'm calling on blah 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 county." And he goes, "No, it's Birdseye." So that's an example of a local procedure where everybody knows that, except for people who are transient. And I had to file a NASA as a result of that. And I discovered that there are a lot of the smaller airports that have this same issue. And so actually, it's a great idea, Sarah, to go query the couple million NASA reports for that airport, and then see what some of the situations are.
So when we talk about querying these NASA reports, where can the average flight instructor go find these?
Sure. So you can Google NASA reports ASRS, and that'll come up. But if you really want to go directly to the source, it's asrs.arc.nasa.gov.
Okay, and we'll pop a link in the show notes so we can do a direct link there to make it easy for everybody.
And they're really simple. It's very intuitive. There's basically, if you want to make the report, then there's a link on the upper menu bar where you click on that, and then you just fill that out. I mentioned that there were a couple million. I might be short on that. They hit the million mark in 2012.
Oh, wow.
And they're averaging about 95,000 per year. So actually, it probably is at 2 million at this point.
Yeah. My fuzzy math, that would work out. Yeah, so these are great. And the thing we said we like to learn from these, because you have it in the pilot's own words, but we also have to recognize that these have been de-identified. So we're not in not all cases are you totally sure where they occurred. And also pilots will and other crew members will report various levels of detail.
That's right.
So it's not like an NTSB report where, they're digging deep into, past weather forecasts and what the conditions were at the time. You've got what the pilot gave you, essentially. And so that can also be a great setup for conversations between flight instructors and their learners, and crafting kind of different scenarios based on that one, or kind of different variants of, hey, so this happened, but what would have happened if it was in these conditions, or the runway was longer or shorter or contaminated, or
if they got more sleep. NASA reports
anything.
An ideal tool to foster, develop, and to maintain aeronautical decision-making skills, in my humble opinion, because again, on the one hand, you've got their mindset, the first person mindset in the description. And in, as you said, in some cases, there are other people who have witnessed the same event or been part of the same event who have submitted their own NASA reports. More often in the airline world, but it is true in the GA world. And the great thing about the NASA reporting team is that they will find those that are from the same incident, and they will put them together so that you can sort of triangulate the incident and get perspective from the first person perspective from the different people who witnessed it, which again fleshes out more of what's that incident, and also the mindset of the person, which again speaks to further development of aeronautical decision-making skills.
Right, because I'm thinking of a NASA report I filed, gosh, maybe a couple of years ago. We were departing. It was myself and my instrument student, and they were, in the approach phase of training, so they were under the foggles pretty quick, and we were departing to the southwest, and it was a towered airport. There was another aircraft coming in. They said they were to the east. And they were clearly having a hard time communicating with Tower where they were. And lo and behold, my learner went under the foggles. They're doing a great job flying. And I look up and this airplane's like right there. And I'm like, oh goodness. And so, I took controls and we leveled off. It was a couple 100 feet lower than comfortable, but
Yeah.
What we had to do it in the moment. And got under them, reported to Tower that the aircraft was, right ahead and above us. It got clear of the conflict and continued on our way. But it really would have been interesting to read the report, had that other pilot filed one, like how did actually you end up on the approach path on the west, or the departure path on the west side of the airport when you all were supposed to be on the east side of the airport where the approach bits were.
Yeah.
So and how much of a good learning experience that would be, because like for us filing the NASA report, we were confident we hadn't done anything wrong, but it was just, hey, to put it out there that this had occurred. But yeah, what was going on through that other pilot's mind, and getting lost and ending up out there.
The nice thing about you submitting yours is, at the very least, you're letting other people know it's happened to somebody else aside from themselves. Because a lot of pilots sometimes will get into a situation where they think, oh man, I'm so dumb. Nobody's ever done that before. I've got to be the first one. And so the NASA report points out, no, you're not the first.
Yeah. It almost takes some extraordinary talent anymore to do something original. Not that it's not
Right.
possible, but yeah, we are just humans out there doing it. We are going to make a wider range of mistakes, and the NASA report system is a great way, or the aviation safety reporting system. I suppose we should throw the actual name of the program. We're all familiar with it as the NASA report. It is a great way. It's a great tool for us to communicate broadly what our experiences are, because we can't do that through NTSB, because that needs to, again, hit that certain threshold.
Right.
It's going to be a year or two behind because of the sheer level of detail that they need to go into to produce those. And they're phenomenal reports, but they just don't capture everything.
Right.
And so the ASRS system is really kind of the only broad scale pilot to pilot or crew member to crew member. Because like you said, controllers, flight attendants, mechanics, the whole industry can come together as a communication tool there.
And the nice thing about, again, you don't have to have broken a plane or injured somebody or fatally or anything. The great thing about NASA's or ASRS system is it was set up to encourage reporting. Self-reporting is not something a lot of pilots want to do. One, because it's embarrassing, and two, because it's a little bit of pride and ego, and three, because some of us don't trust the government. And so the ASRS system was set up initially in 1975 by the FAA, to be, they called it the Any Mouse system, which was a joke on anonymous system. But after 6 months of it having been officially launched, 0 people had made reports, right? So at the time, the FAA had and ALPA determined that the only way this was going to happen is you have to send the reports to a third party. In other words, you can't have the Fox guarding a chicken coop. So they got NASA, because NASA Ames was already doing some psychological stuff with human factors regarding, aviation, aeronautics, and all that good stuff. So they agreed to take the reports, de-identify them, which is another key, and then put them on their own, using their own team, put them on the ASRS website and make that available to folks. So once that happened, then people really began to take hold of the concept. And then, like I said, by 2012, 1 million NASA reports had been filed. Mm-hmm. So if you don't mind, just a real quick, we have to remind people that there wasn't a violation. It was intentional. Right. You didn't break anything like a plane or kill anybody. Right. And the violation, this is one that I often forget, including me, the violation that you had not done previously, that you had actually received a violation for in the previous 5 years, and you didn't mean to do it. And finally, that you submit the report within 10 days of either the incident occurring or becoming aware of the incident. Mm-hmm. And if you do all that, then it's kind of a little bit of a get out of jail free card.
Yeah. So it can certainly help with, any possible repercussions from an enforcement, compliance actions anymore. They're looking for re-education, but certainly it does indicate a positive attitude. You're willing to learn from it. You're willing to share with others. So it's a great tool. But it's great to point out, this isn't just a blanket, fill it out whenever you want. And it's some sort of magic wand, and there will be no repercussions for whatever you filled out on the form, either paper or online, you can submit. So the advisory circular, which we'll include a link to in the show notes, includes all of that. The ASRS program website has a page with all that. So it is good to be aware. Even if you don't meet all of those conditions, you can still file the report. It's just not going to necessarily offer you the protections it might in other circumstances.
Right. But at least it's on the record. How do they say it? They say the FAA cannot then use the report in an enforcement action against you. And so, right, even if let's say you found out about it and then you were on the 11th day, that doesn't protect you, but at least you've got the report in to indicate that you were trying to make an attempt to be aware, and that you were, sorry about it and it wasn't intentional. Go out, and this is important. You can't go out and go, I'm going to violate a regulation today on purpose, and then I'm going to fill out an NASA. Right? That doesn't count.
Right. And it does need to be purely, I filled one out. I had an ADS-B out failure in rural airspace, but, we were 5 or 6 miles from our home airport. So we just went back and landed because that's where my maintenance base was. It was the closest airport. It happened to be in rural airspace, but it was the closest thing available. So that's what we just turned around and went back. And we were getting mixed indications. We weren't 100% sure it had failed because we were getting kind of on and again, off again.
Yeah.
Stuff. But so like that, we didn't go out planning. I flew this aircraft regularly and had worked just fine. This installation had been there for a couple of years. And just that day, something happened with it. And so, we just went back. But I didn't mean to violate that. We took off, and then the GPS said, oh, by the way. All these little things started lighting up. Okay.
And it doesn't make the aircraft airworthy in that case. But it is something that, it is a regulation now. So I wasn't aware it had happened. Now I know it's happened. I'm going to file this NASA report and report and let people know. Right.
Yeah, and that's all we did, and nothing ever came of it. We got it all sorted out, with the maintenance shop, and downloaded the card or whatever, and that's all it ever was. But now people, know that, hey, these types of things do happen. It was totally unintentional. I think that aircraft had even flown earlier that day.
Yeah.
And totally fine.
Right.
But that kind of stuff is going to pop up and happen.
And it also, the learning lesson I take from that is pay attention to GPS, because the GPS will tell you if your ADS-B out has failed.
Yeah, like those little flashing boxes mean something.
That's right.
You may have to push a button or two to get to the actual thing, but
acknowledge the message. That's the other takeaway: is acknowledge the message. Don't just let things flash.
We just had to figure out what to do, because we're in an area where our airport is within rural airspace, but your next airport is not your home base, and it's 30 miles away. And what's your best option here?
Yeah.
It was pretty uneventful.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, let's chat about some of the more memorable anecdotes that you included in your book, because these are kind of, my little ADSB failure. Okay, life lesson, pay attention to the flashing light on your GPS, but not necessarily the most insightful
Right. Okay. Yeah.
story.
Well, there are two types that come to mind. The first one is about carbon monoxide poisoning on the ground in two separate aircraft. One was an airliner, 121 aircraft, and the other was a cargo, a small cargo Cessna 208. So in the first instance, the flight crew came on board. It was late at night, and they were starting their shift. And the aircraft only had one pack, which means they only had one air conditioner operating. And they had something like 40,000 pounds of dry ice that they were toting. And because it was cold and because there was only one pack, so the air conditioner works as a cooling and heating. As soon as they got on board, they buttoned up all the hatches, and within 10 minutes, this was a 3-person crew. 2 out of the 3 were largely incapacitated, and the captain was not. So she was able to get her oxygen mask on, contact ground, and get them to the ramp support and get them to open all the hatches again. And then she got the oxygen masks on everybody else, and it took about 20 minutes for them to recover. And what they discovered there was, because there was only one pack, and because it was cold, and because all the hatches were open prior to, they'd forgotten that, CO2 off gases. CO2 is carbon dioxide, right? Did I say carbon monoxide? I meant carbon dioxide. Mm-hmm. So their carbon dioxide was off gassing, but it wasn't noticeable. But once they buttoned everything up, it replaced all the oxygen, all the air, essentially in the entire aircraft. And so we often think of hypoxia as something you get at altitude. What they were suffering was carbon dioxide induced hypoxia on the ground because of so much dry ice, which is made of what, boys and girls? Frozen carbon dioxide. So that's one instance. Another instance was similar.
That's wild.
A guy in a Cessna 208, he had only 50 pounds of, or so, less than 100 pounds of carbon dioxide that was in his Cessna 208 that had been preloaded for him. Door had been left open. He got in, buttoned up, and the same thing happened to him. He began to suffer the effects of hypoxia before he even started the engine, and was able to recognize that something was wrong, got the door open, and stumbled out. And so, again, hypoxia is something that can occur on the ground. It's not something that's just altitude related, mm-hmm. or a sort of drug or physically related if you have some sort of physical problem, right?
Yeah, I mean, medically, it's just a deficiency of oxygen.
That's right.
However, that can occur.
Right. So the takeaway for the Cessna 208 guy was, hey, recognize what you've got and make sure that, because some people will even take, general aviation pilots will take small thermoses, or they'll take a cooler and put, dry ice in there to keep stuff cool, because it's much more efficient as a cooling mechanism than mm-hmm. regular ice, and it's also lighter weight. So it's not unheard of to have some dry ice in your cooler. But if your cooler's off gassing and you're buttoned up in your little GA airplane, it's entirely possible you're setting yourself up for hypoxia.
And that's a good lesson for looking at the NASA database, and don't filter it down too far just because you're a GA flight instructor going, doing your normal training activities. There's a wealth to learn even from the air carriers, pilots, the flight attendants, all those different crew members and their different roles will bring a different perspective. And the types of issues they report are certainly scalable. This was a situation where, a system was partially disabled or something, so what would you do if in your aircraft, maybe something wasn't working entirely? You can transition that to maybe one radio was down. I've never flown a Cessna that has the option of 2 air conditioners. But you can kind of scale that and,
right.
and say, hey, what would you do if, you did have this partial system failure?
Right. Right.
And because certainly I've seen those. So don't discount reading just those NASA reports and what a light GA flight instructor could learn from them, because it was an air carrier operation or a significantly heavier, more complex aircraft. Kind of think in broader terms and scale it to what you're doing. There's right. a lot to learn out there from that.
Yeah, in that specific case, the cooler, if somebody brings a cooler that's got dry ice and fish or whatever it is they want to keep frozen in there, remember, that thing is leaking as it's, because a cooler is usually styrofoam or some sort of plastic that's
Mm-hmm.
it's not hermetically sealed. It's gonna leak the carbon dioxide out, and so just be aware. The other thing one that I'd like to share is I queried asleep at the yoke, and what came up was a guy who was, I guess he was running checks this time, and it was late at night. He had worked all day and had to drive a long way to get to the airport. Was sleep deprived and decided to take the flight anyway. And was just apparently just going to go, say, from like Tennessee down to Georgia. Fell asleep and ended up out over the Gulf.
Mm.
He woke up, realized that he was lost, and was able to turn back toward Florida before having to ditch just off the coast of Florida. He was able to call the Mayday and got out of the aircraft successfully and floated for about 20 minutes or so using a seat cushion. The Coast Guard initially came and dropped a life preserver to get to him, but he couldn't get to it. And then they came back with a helicopter and they hoisted him out. So his takeaway from the whole event of being sleep deprived, working all day and all night, falling asleep, running out of gas over the Gulf, ditching the airplane, was he needed to learn how to swim. So, not
I mean, I maybe would have drawn some other lessons.
exactly. Exactly. So these are fun ones because they get you to laugh and then think about, okay, well, that's not what I would have thought. I would have sort of focused on sleep deprivation and ways to stay awake, and also, et cetera, right? But yeah, at least it's one of those great ones where it gets people thinking.
Right, yeah, and even thinking, about imposing your own duty day and things like that that aren't necessarily going to exist, just in the average GA operation, if you're just a solo pilot or say running checks, that was probably some sort of operation where they may have had guardrails like that.
Or not.
Or,
But the reality is what is exactly what you said or just a second ago, which is giving it self-imposed guardrails because we are great at lying to ourselves about our
mm-hmm,
ability, right? Aeronautical decision making isn't just about staying situationally aware with the airplane, the weather, and the mission. It's also about staying situationally aware about ourselves, and that's
mm-hmm.
the hardest thing that we can do. It's the thing we lean least against. And so aeronautical decision making with an instructor to a student, teaching them to lean against themselves a little more and to be a little more critical of what their actual physiological situation is a great thing to develop.
Yeah, and those personal minimums, they're not just some silly exercise for student pilots. They're great for anybody, even if you are in an operation that has an op spec or some other form of operational guardrail that's there for you. You may need to consider what works for you. Because certainly we've all been in that position where it's the end of a long day, or maybe early in the morning, we didn't sleep as well as we've thought, things like that. And we need to remember that being fatigued, there's a tipping point where being fatigued is actually worse than being inebriated,
That's right.
and as far as its impacts on your brain
That's right.
and
That's right.
decision making skill. So,
Yeah.
in this case, that may have played a role for that particular pilot.
Yeah. And for student pilots who might be pressed up against because of weather situations, they've been delayed a lot, but they're up against their check ride and they want to make sure that they get all their stuff, all of their practice flights in, or they want to make sure that they get all of the requirements for that particular check ride in vis-a-vis cross country, night, and or
Hmm.
instrument time. Just because you're up against it, being able to say, you know what, maybe I need to reschedule my check ride because I'm whipped. I've been flying for 5 days straight. I've been anxious about my check ride, so I haven't been sleeping well. I haven't been eating well either for a variety of reasons. Instead of trying to push up against that and pressing on, these NASA reports allow them to see that other people have made mistakes doing some of the similar things that they're attempting to do and realizing, oh, okay, objectively, that's not a good idea. And it's okay for me to do it because somebody else has sort of given me permission by making that mistake and pointing that out, what the
Hmm.
consequences are.
Yeah. All right, great. Well, those are some great stories. It's amazing what pilots do. I thought your one with the guy in the Gulf was gonna end with remember a flotation device. Not I don't need to learn how to swim. I'm like, oh, that's way more baseline than than I was expecting. Um, and so, Jeffrey, before we part ways here, tell us just a little bit more about your book because you're using the proceeds to benefit helping other
Yeah.
young pilots who need a leg up get into the industry.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah. So I've been very fortunate. I've had a series of mentors who've helped me get where I am in my journey. I'm not a perfect pilot, and I'm not a natural pilot. I work very hard every day to make sure that I'm good at that. And I thought that was gonna not not going to work for me, or I wouldn't be able to get where I'm going. So, because of the three initial mentors, some very elderly, very spry Tuskegee airmen who helped me realize that my lack of innate natural flying ability wasn't going to get in the way of me achieving my dreams, and also the fact that I didn't know anything other than sort of white male pilots growing up, and so because I didn't see myself, I also didn't think that there was something I could do. So they really helped mentor me and guide me, and as a result, since that time, my early part of my journey, I've worked really hard to pay that forward. I've been an AOPA mentor for 25 years. I'm a mentor at my airline as well. And when I wrote this book, I wrote it because I had heard a story about a pastor in East Orange, New Jersey, who started a flight school in the basement of his church, in his words, to keep kids out of prison, a hospital, or the cemetery. And when I heard that, Eagle Flight Squadron Inc. is the name of the flight school. I thought, what can I do to help? And I realized that my skill set is I'm a professional writer as well as an airline pilot. Why don't I take the best of my human factors columns and put them in a book? So the book is called YIKES 100 Smart Pilots and the Dumb Things They Did, Yet Live to Tell About Them. And my wife and I then started the Victor Kilo Fund, which is a nonprofit aerospace education foundation. We call it Victor Kilo because Victor Kilo is Greek for 1,000 victories. And anytime you achieve a big goal, like getting your PPL or anything in life that's major, it usually takes about 1,000 little victories, right, to get to where you're going. So that exemplifies that. We started that last year, and then late last year, we began selling Yikes. And all the proceeds from all the sales go toward the Victor Kilo Fund to fund flight scholarships, flight equipment, other training scholarships for anybody, individual or under-resourced flight school, Civil Air Patrol Squadron, or STEM group. And we were very fortunate because in June of 2025, we'd achieved enough sales that I was able to approach the Eagle Flight Squadron and let them know we'd like to present them with our very first flight training scholarship. And we did. It was a $5,000 flight training scholarship.
That's
So,
nice. That
yeah.
that'll get someone a good portion of the way through. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a big step.
Yeah, in their case, because they own two of their own airplanes, that
Mm.
will actually get somebody their PPL.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, so they've really honed that in. That's fantastic.
yeah. So it was quite a joyous event. Never done anything like that before. Truly very emotional for me, and really inspired me to continue to sell the book and to push the book out there so that we can get more flight scholarships, aviation scholarships, or flight simulators to folks who are looking to get into this industry.
Yeah, that sounds like a wonderful cause, especially as things are only getting more and more expensive. Young students who are struggling already are going to struggle more.
That's right.
So being able to get those resources out there will help everybody.
And that's true, and I appreciate that. And we really need a whole other generation of pilots, general aviation pilots, right? We've got a great group now, but as you said, because it's an expensive, at the very least, it's an expensive hobby, and at the most, it's an expensive training toward a career. But whatever we can do to help promulgate the next generation, that's what we're hoping to do in some small way with Yikes.
Hmm. Yep, one at a time. So
That's right. That's right.
we'll get there.
That's
All
right.
right. Well, Jeffrey, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come on More Right Rudder and share all this great knowledge on how to use the NASA report and some of these great anecdotes and the things you're doing with your book.
Yes, Sarah, it's been a pleasure. I'm a big fan of NAFI, also a NAFI member, of course, and I encourage everybody else, if you're watching this and you aren't, why aren't you?
All right. Well, thanks so much, Jeffrey. We'll see ya.
Okay, take care. Bye.